Sat in a van, I've been cleaned for 5 years. Welcome to the detailing show. You're gonna be like, hey, who's that guy? In this video, we're going to try and remove 5 years of built-up dust and debris in a works van as a surprise for the owner. There was a big task at hand and limited by the fact that we had a severely limited time frame in which to achieve it. See what we can do and how much of a transformation we can achieve. So like any job, the initial step is just simply assessment, find out what needs to be tackled in what order. The main thing that stood out for us on the initial look through was dust. It was in every vent, every nook, every cranny, and heavily into all of the fabric surfaces on the seats. We drew up a plan and we set to it. The first stage of any job like this is to remove anything that's loose. Being a works van, we're very mindful that although it looks chaotic, we're confident that the owner of the van knows where every screw and what every bit of information written on every scrap of paper means. With that in mind, we had to make a decision of what we could throw out and what we needed to inventory. And we made the decision that if it was the remnants of a meal deal or a scratch card, it could go in the bin. But if it was a screw, bolt, bit of paper, scrap of wood, that we needed to catalogue it, put it in a bag, and then once the clean was completed, return it to whence it came. The vacuuming job on this one was by a significant margin the biggest portion of our workload for the day. We ended up with 2 vacuum cleaners, a lot of brushes, and a lot of patience and persistence. The dust, particularly the sawdust, seemed to be almost a little bit clingy. It wanted to hold on to plastic surfaces, so it needed brushing and a lot of agitation just to lift it away. But the results were worth it, and it allowed us to move on to the next stage, which would be the wet cleaning. The loose battery cover actually gave us the opportunity to take a piece of the flooring out of the van so that we could test some different cleaning techniques. The advice always with any cleaning is to do the least amount or the least aggressive option possible to risk any further damage. And where we started with a soft bristle brush, it was clear that although progress was made, it was going to take a long time. So we moved up to a more aggressive brush, a little bit more of a scrubbing action, but the same all-purpose cleaner, and this yielded the ideal results for what we were hoping to achieve.
But as they go,
test sections done, we knew what we needed to do, so we took it upscale for the interior of the van. We mixed the cleaner into an aerating foaming spray bottle just to allow adequate wetting of the surface without drenching, and the scrubbing brush was successful. We thought we could use the drill brushes to a speedier effect.
Dirt on the floor now. But
Cleaning all control surfaces like pedals and steering wheels is key, not just from a satisfaction point of view, but also one of safety. Important to note that you should never ever, once cleaned, use any dressing on pedals or a steering wheel. They need to have as much friction between you and them as possible, and putting any type of greasy dressing on it is just asking for disaster. And this here is just on the edge of the battery compartment, so minimal amount of cleaner used. We decided against using the foaming sprayer for that very reason as well. So just a little bit of care, attention. Again, this may be a little bit more of a time intensive job, but it was worth it not to cause any issues with the van.
it's really quite soft, aren't they, these ones?
Yeah. As you clean through any project like this, it seems that the areas you clean, the surfaces just get smaller and smaller, eventually leading you to some toothpickery, some tiny brushes, little swabs, and this was the first part, really, the step into the van that just had years of accumulated muck and concrete that fortunately was willing to come out with a little bit of persuasion. When it came to cleaning the radio, I decided to use these swabs to really minimise the amount of fluid that was going to go onto the buttons. Probably overkill, and in the vast majority of jobs I wouldn't be as cautious, but in this case it was an Italian van, and well, we all know what their electronics are like. The vents on this van proved a real bugbear, purely down to the fact that the dust was through the whole air conditioning system. So as much as we could get into the vents, we couldn't really get behind them to any massive extent without removing them, and time didn't allow for that. So a surface clean, although not perfect, was going to have to suffice. So come on, as gross as this looks, it's weirdly satisfying to watch. It's kind of like those videos where people are squeezing spots where you don't want to see it, but you can't quite look away. It was actually very satisfying getting this part back to some semblance of clean, because the build-up of dead skin cells and oil in this skin knob was massive, and for me it was actually oddly quite an enjoyable part of the process.
Really going to let the side down. Sprayed that, wiped it, and wipe it off.
And this part just goes to show that no matter how thorough you're trying to be, parts do get missed, and we found once we were working down the binnacle and the dash that we just missed this whole stalk, and it had dust on it and it needed a scrub, so we set back to it. So with the plastics all cleaned, we moved onto the seats. You'll notice that these are not nearly as wet as maybe other videos you've seen or what you would expect, and there is good reason. The van, as you guys know from the start of the video, was with us for a very short period of time, and these seats needed to be reasonably usable about an hour after we were done with it. So with that in mind, we wanted to give the seats adequate time to dry, and over-wetting wouldn't have allowed that. It would have actually caused us a problem. So although around about 80% of what could be achieved has been achieved here, and ideally you'd want to go for the maximum amount of clean as possible, this was a job that was approached with the constraints of time and understanding of the requirements at the forefront of our minds, and we think we did a pretty good job considering.
Yeah, I reckon that brass will be fine for the rest of the seat, but for this one, because it's so far.
And by comparison, as you can see, the passenger seats, which were not going to be needed to be dry as quick, but still as quick as possible, were wetted a bit more just to really help to achieve a cleaner end result.
going over in the middle.
Yeah. And with the seats done, all that was left was a quick wipe down and polish of the glass, and that was us done. It was an exhausting few hours. Mike and I enjoyed going through this one. Hopefully the van stays in a little better condition, but if it doesn't, in 5 years' time, we look forward to seeing it again. If you've enjoyed this video, let us know down below. If you've any questions or comments, please ask them. And if there's anyone that you think would find this satisfying to watch, please share it with them. It all helps the channel to grow. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please enjoy these coming up after shots, and we'll see you again soon.